When another camper pulled into Buck's camp that morning, he expected to find a couple enjoying breakfast. Instead, he found a campsite burning to the ground. The Toyota LandCruiser was on fire too, and really on fire, past saving, sitting on its rims. No one was screaming for help though. No one was trying to put the fire out. Just smoke rising through the mountain ash and silence. The owners of the campsite were simply gone. No bodies, no note, no footprints leading anywhere useful. Just thousands of square kilometers of Australian wilderness and two people who had been there the night before and weren't anymore. Did they get lost? Were they hurt? Was it an accident? Or did someone spend over a year making sure nobody would ever find out what happened to Russell Hill and Carol Clay? Hi, and welcome back to the channel. This is Scareful Stories, where I tell true crime stories to make you think, make you wonder, and maybe, just maybe, make you a little more careful. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate you giving a like, subscribing, and leaving a comment down below. So, who were Russell Hill and Carol Clay, and what in the world happened to them in the Australian wilderness? Russell Hill was 74 years old, and if you asked anyone who knew him, they tell you the same thing. He was a bush person, completely and genuinely. He'd spent much of his working life in the Victorian High Country, which is logging country. It's dense and demanding, and he'd never really left it behind even after he retired. His friend, Rob Ashland, put it simply, if you wanted to know anything about the Wonnangatta Valley, just ask Russell. He'd probably been there more than anyone. He knew every track, every campsite, and every crossing. He also loved his radios, amateur radio, the high frequency or shortwave radio, the kind that can reach across vast distances where mobile phones are useless, which was a genuine passion of his. And it wasn't just a hobby. When Russell went into the bush, his rig went with him. He'd check in with other radio enthusiasts, and he would call his wife Robin and let people know where he was. He was meticulous about it, and his wife came to expect it. He was almost certainly overpacked for that trip, like most people usually do. And with him was Carol Clay, who was 73. She'd been a stalwart at the Country Women's Association for years. She was practical, community-minded, and the kind of person who showed up when things needed to get done. She'd been married twice. She lost her first husband, and her second marriage had ended in divorce. But somewhere along the way, she and Russell had found each other. Robin Hill, Russell's wife, had known Carol for more than 50 years. She described her as a longtime family friend. Russell's daughters knew her face because she was just around a lot. What nobody in Russell's family knew, though, not Robin and not his daughters, was that Russell and Carol had been in a relationship for approximately 14 years. You can imagine that wasn't exactly the phone call Robin Hill expected to receive. Some reports suggest they were teenage sweethearts who had separated, married other people, and eventually reconnected. But however it started, by 2020, it was a real relationship and a carefully kept secret. When Russell's daughter, Colleen, was later told about it, she said, "It was a shock when the police mentioned something about, do we know a Carol? But that was the first we knew about it." Robin found out about the affair at the same time she found out that her husband was missing. Two pieces of devastating news arriving together. On March 19th of 2020, Russell Hill drove from his home in Druin. He picked up Carol from her place in Pakenham. She told her friends she was going away for a few days and expected to be home around the 28th or 29th. Russell had his radio, his gear, and his LandCruiser. They headed for the high country. To understand what happens next, you need to understand where they went. The high country means you're driving on unpaved four-wheel drive tracks for hours. There's roads that drop into the valley involving sharp turns, loose rocks, and sections where one side falls away into nothing. If your vehicle breaks down, you're not calling roadside assistance. You're walking. If the weather turns, and it may turn fast because you're in alpine country, you just have to deal with it. If you get seriously hurt, help is not coming quickly. The nearest paved road might be 2 hours away and over difficult terrain. Mobile reception may not even exist, and that's not an exaggeration. It just in many of the places doesn't. People bring their shortwave radios for a reason. Once the sun goes down out there, there isn't another light anywhere. The darkness is absolute, and the quiet is the kind that can make city people uncomfortable. And yet, people love it out there. Experienced bush campers return season after season because it's also just incredibly beautiful. Alpine ash forest and clear rivers, mountain plains, historic huts built by cattlemen 100 years ago, and wildlife that you won't see anywhere else. The campsite known as Buck's Camp sits in the valley near Dry River Creek Track. It's the kind of spot that regulars know by name, but there's also something else worth noting about the Wonnangatta Valley. It has a history all its own. In 1917, more than 100 years ago, the station manager and cook at Wonnangatta Station disappeared. They were later found to have been murdered, and the case has never been officially solved. Would Russell and Carol's murder also go unsolved? The valley has been keeping secrets for a long, long time. Russell and Carol arrived at Buck's Camp on March 19th. At around 6 p.m. on March 20th, Russell made his radio call to a friend. He sounded calm and normal and said nothing unusual, and that was the last anyone heard from either of them. Robin Hill reported her husband missing on March 25th. He'd missed his check-ins, and this wasn't like him. Police began searching on March 27th. 2 days later, they got a tip from someone in the public. When officers arrived at Buck's Camp on March 28th, they found the burned campsite and the burned LandCruiser. Forensic scientists arrived and spent days collecting what remained. Heavy glass and metal fragments, solar panels, and scraps of clothing. It was the kind of debris that tells you that the fire was hot and thorough. Russell's drone was missing. Police declared the scene suspicious and called in the helicopters. Here's what the next few weeks looked like for the investigators. They expected to find something, a boot, a backpack, even a body, even a fragment of something. Because in a case like this, you expect that the wilderness will give you at least one piece of information to work with, but it didn't. The helicopter swept the valley and found nothing. Ground teams pushed through dense bush for days and found nothing. Forensic units examined the campsite down to the soil, but nothing told them where these two people had gone. Weeks passed and the families waited. The searches continued, and every time a team went back out, there was a little bit of hope that today would be the day something turned up. And every time, they came back empty. Months passed, and spring became summer, and summer became autumn, and the high country kept its secrets. By early 2021, police had launched multiple separate search operations, including aerial and ground searches along the Great Alpine Road, through river valleys and across ridgelines. In March of 2021, they did 4 days of searching in the Wonnangatta area and found nothing. April of 2021, they did aerial searches over the valley and found nothing. And think about this from the family's perspective. Russell's wife, Robin, spoke to the media in May of 2021. "I can't see how they will come home," she said. "He hasn't spent any money. He hasn't done anything. I just want them found one way or the other." And you can imagine what this poor woman was thinking. Her husband is missing, and she finds out that he didn't go missing alone. He went missing with his mistress, which you had no knowledge of. And that mistress was a family friend of yours. And then you have to wonder, did they run off together? But I think Robin knew that it wasn't that simple. Robin had found out about the affair, and now she was grieving a missing husband and a marriage that wasn't what she thought it was. And yet, she still just wanted to know where her husband was. In the background, though, police weren't just searching the bush. They were also watching someone. There was a roadside camera on the Great Alpine Road, which is the main route in and out of this part of the high country, and that camera had captured something. On the morning of March 21st, 2020, a dark-colored Nissan Patrol towing a trailer appeared on the camera heading away from the valley. That same morning, Russell Hill's phone, silent since the previous evening, briefly connected to a mobile tower. The location placed it near the route where the vehicle had been filmed. So the police had 2 data points, the same morning, the same general location. One of them was the phone of a missing person. and one was a picture of the vehicle. If you're thinking that this is starting to sound suspicious, so were the police. Detectives began pulling everything they could about who else had been in the Wonnangatta Valley around March 20th. They looked at witness accounts, vehicle sightings, and forum discussions among the camping and four-wheel drive community where people post about their trips. The police became increasingly interested in one person in particular. There had been another camper at Buck's camp. He'd arrived a day before Russell and Carol on March 18th, so he was already set up when they pulled in. He was an experienced outdoorsman with a license to carry firearms, and he was there hunting deer, which is legal in the Alpine National Park. By all accounts from the radio community, he joined a group call on the evening of March 20th and seemed completely normal and unremarkable. By March 22nd, though, he was home in Melbourne. His vehicle matched what the camera had captured. His phone records were consistent with the tower ping from Russell Hill's phone. By September of 2021, 18 months into the investigation, police had obtained warrants. They placed surveillance devices on this man's vehicle and in his home. They were recording conversations and they were watching his movements. They were waiting for the right moment. And then, on the evening of November 13th, something happened that police had been waiting for. This man and his wife were at home watching television. A program came on about the disappearance of Russell Hill and Carol Clay. The show featured footage of a vehicle and trailer captured on roadside cameras near the Great Alpine Road. His wife looked at the screen and said, "Hey, this looks like their car." Can you imagine how awkward that was? In the days that followed, surveillance footage recorded the man removing a distinctive awning from his vehicle, the same awning his wife had recognized on the program. His name was Greg Lynn. He was 55 years old, married, and a father. He was a captain for Jetstar Airways, a commercial pilot who flew Airbus A320s out of Melbourne. He was taken into custody and held for several days. He received legal advice, and his attorney, rightfully, advised him not to talk. Okay, the lesson that everybody should take is, even if you've done nothing wrong, get an attorney and don't talk to the police until you've talked to your attorney. On day 3, though, he decided to talk anyway. He told police his version of what happened at Buck's camp, and then he told them something else. He told them where the bodies were. Forensic specialists were sent out to Union Spur Track, north of the town of Dargo. Inside a fallen tree trunk, half buried in the undergrowth, they found more than 2,000 fragments of burnt bone. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already suspected. It was the bones of Russell Hill and Carol Clay. Greg Lynn admitted that he'd been there. He admitted that there had been a confrontation, and he admitted that he burned the campsite and the vehicle. Along with that, he admitted that he had moved the bodies to the Union Spur Track, but he said the deaths were an accident. His account, given to police over several days of interviews, went something like this. There had been tension at the camp over his deer hunting. Russell Hill had apparently used a drone to film Greg Lynn while he was out stalking deer, and he had threatened to take the footage to the police. It's unclear if Russell thought Greg was illegally hunting or if he was upset that Russell had a loaded weapon at the campsite. The hunting was legal, but firearms must remain unloaded and unused within 100 meters of a designated campsite. One evening, things escalated. According to Greg, at around 9 or 10, Russell came to his car and grabbed his shotgun. Greg followed him back toward the campsite and said there was a struggle over the weapon. The gun went off accidentally, and Carol Clay was shot. Greg's own account, Russell, having just watched Carol fall to the ground, came at him with a knife, screaming. There was a second struggle. Greg said he fired the remaining shots into the air to scare Russell off and then retreated to his vehicle. But in the end, both Russell and Carol were dead. Greg said he panicked. He knew how it looked, a licensed gun owner with 2 dead campers at a shared site. But there were no witnesses. He made a decision, and a catastrophic one, and began trying to erase the evidence. He burned the campsite. He burned the LandCruiser. He loaded the bodies into his vehicle and drove them to the Union Spur Track, kilometers away, and left them there. Then he drove home to Caroline Springs. Monday morning, he went back to work. For 8 months, life continued on. He went to his job, he spent time with his family, and he kept to his routine. Police were searching the high country, and the families of the victims were pleading for information in the media. Investigators were running operation after operation and coming back with nothing. And then, in November of 2020, 8 months after the night at Buck's camp, Greg got in his car and drove back to Union Spur Track. He found the spot where the bodies were, and he burned the remains. So think about that. 8 months had passed, but he made the drive back into the Alpine country to the very specific location in the dense wilderness, and he tried one more time to make sure that Russell Hill and Carol Clay would disappear forever. He scattered what was left inside the fallen tree trunk. And it's difficult then to reconcile that return trip with what he said was momentary panic right after he had said he accidentally killed them. This is what the prosecution would argue at trial. The trial began in the Supreme Court of Victoria in May of 2024 and lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution's case was built around that sequence of actions. There were 2 dead people, and the evidence was burned and bodies were moved, and there was a return trip 8 months later to destroy the bodies even further. The prosecutor argued that this was consciousness of guilt, that each action, step by step, was the behavior of a man who knew he had committed murder and was trying to ensure that he would never be caught. The prosecution also had a theory about the order of events. They believed that Greg killed Russell first because of the drone dispute and because Russell represented the immediate threat. And then he killed Carol because she was a witness, a 75-year-old woman who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The defense, of course, had a different argument, which centered around Carol's death being an accident and Russell being almost self-defense. The prosecution called a firearms expert to conduct trajectory tests based on Greg's account of exactly how the shotgun discharged during the struggle. In cross-examination, though, defense counsel drew out something the prosecution almost certainly hadn't planned for. The expert agreed that aspects of Greg's version were plausible. In fact, the phrase that they were spot on was used. The defense absolutely loved that, and you can imagine how mortified the prosecution was that their own expert was giving testimony contrary to the arguments they were trying to make. This caused the prosecutor to do something that, in hindsight, would unravel the entire verdict. In his closing address, he told the jury to disregard the ballistic expert's evidence entirely. He called it total speculation, but this was his own witness, the person the prosecution had called, and he invited the jury to throw out the testimony that was actually pointing toward Greg's account being physically possible. The jury deliberated for 6 days, and on June 25th, 2024, they returned a split verdict: guilty of murdering Carol Clay, not guilty of murdering Russell Hill. The Hill family was devastated by the acquittal. The Clay family had waited 4 years for that guilty verdict. The judge sentenced Greg Lynn to 32 years with a non-parole period of 24 years. And then the appeals began. In December of 2025, Victoria's Court of Appeals, 3 judges in a unanimous decision, overturned the conviction for Carol Clay's murder and ordered a retrial. And the reasons came back to that closing address. The prosecutor had attacked his own expert's credibility without ever giving him the chance to respond to those criticisms. He'd made arguments about Greg's conduct that had never been put to Greg directly during the trial. And under Australian law, that's a fundamental breach of the rules of fairness. Greg should have been able to refute the arguments that the prosecution was making. You can't just throw in something at the last minute in your closing argument without allowing the defendant to respond to them. The court found that it was a substantial miscarriage of justice, and the conviction was set aside. A new trial was ordered, but Greg Lynn cannot be retried for the death of Russell Hill. He was acquitted, and that's final. So what is left is the question of what happened to Carol Clay on the night of March 20th, 2020. and that will go before another jury sometime soon. At the time of this recording, Greg remains in custody. Somewhere in the valley, on the night of March 20th, 2020, something happened that 2 people witnessed and only one survives to describe. For 18 months, the High Country kept that secret. Through wind, rain, and snow, and fires that swept through in the summer, thousands of campers drove those same alpine roads on weekends and pulled into the same sites and cooked their meals over campfires and watched the stars come out, without any idea that only a few kilometers away, hidden inside a fallen tree in the dense bush, lay what remained of 2 people who had come here for the exact reason they were here. In the end, it wasn't the wilderness that gave them up. It was 18 months of patient, methodical detective work, looking at cameras, phone records, surveillance, forensic science, slowly building a case in a place specifically designed to make cases impossible to build. The Valley gave investigators just enough, but whether it gave them the whole truth is something another jury may eventually have to decide. As always, I'd love to know what you make of this one, the split verdict and the appeal, and what do you think actually happened out there that night? Let me know in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. I promise there are more stories where this one came from. Until next time, stay safe, stay careful, and remember, what happens in the wilderness doesn't always stay in the wilderness. Bye, guys.